Welcome to the July 8th, 2019 work session of the Eugene City Council. First item, committee reports and items of interest. Does anyone have items? Okay, Greg, Emily, anyone else? And Betty's third, okay. Greg?
Yeah, a couple weeks ago, we had the opportunity to go to the National League of Cities summer conference meeting, which was held in Indianapolis. And that meeting was part national board meeting, of which I'm a part of, and our 7 advocacy groups or committees for the National League of Cities, and I'm also part of the infrastructure and transportation committee of that body as well. I've also served on the housing task force, which was a short duration task force that we have, that the president, Mayor Karen Freeman Wilson from Gary, Indiana, had convened to deal with the housing crisis across the country, which included affordable housing, missing middle housing, as well as our issues with regard to homelessness or houselessness. There is a comprehensive report that is going to be released tomorrow. We had a few previews of that report that talked about issues around zoning changes and other opportunities on a national basis to do some course correction with regard to providing affordable housing for folks all across our country. And I think that there's some interesting findings that you'll see in that report. I'm looking forward to it. Like I said, we just had a few snippets of it. Staff was still working on it as we were in Indianapolis, and I think that it may give us some information to help us work through some of our issues in Eugene as well. So, and that was about it.
Thank you. Emily?
Thank you. I have a report on the downtown restrooms. We approved $120,000 to get more restrooms downtown. We've been brainstorming and thinking, and a lot of departments have been helping out. And I'm really excited to tell you that the 2 bathrooms in the Over Park, they've painted the hallway. There's signage, so you can tell that there's actually restrooms there. And they were going to do one at a time. I don't know what the timeline is, but paint them and install diaper changing shelves. And I'm told that there will be 2 more locations are being discussed. But I think this is really exciting. And they're going to be open 24/7. They will be monitored, so someone will come by at least once an hour, but they won't be attended. So lots of good thoughts about that working, because monitoring would change the situation totally. So here's our opportunity. They're nice. You walk down the hallway now, it's not spooky. I wanted yellow with polka dots, but it's a nice warm beige. So I think that it's much more amenable to everyone, and that was part of my goal. Was if you have money you can use porcelain, and if you don't have any you can't go. So I was really interested in using sustainably facilities we already have, and in the equity of everybody getting to go inside. So this is the start of many bathrooms. Thank you.
Sounds wonderful. Did you have a follow-up?
Quick question. Are those like the loos in Portland? Are they self-cleaning?
No, these are bathrooms that are already in the Over Park, so they're regular bathrooms.
Just opening them up again.
Yeah, well, they've been open, but they weren't signed. Nobody knew they were there, so they weren't getting many visits a day, which made it look like we should close them down. Because I went over there, and it took a while to find it, and it was kind of dirty in there because it was only being cleaned once a week. So we want it to work, let's put some effort in it, and it's already better, it's got signs. Everybody should go there.
We should all go after the meeting. Thank you. Okay, I put myself down next. I have several items. The speed bumps in the Overpark. I've heard numerous complaints. Those are vicious speed bumps. people say their cars are going to be ruined. Definitely, they're going to have to go to an alignment shop. So I think Jerry and Walt's alignment shop will be happy. One person told me when she went over that the building shook. I wasn't there, but that sounds ominous. But everyone's worried about their cars, and the people at the DAC tell me that they've had numerous complaints. So I said, I know the city manager.
We'll send information out on that. Of course, it's a safety issue for us, and so if you don't have some way to ensure that cars are slowing down, part of the issue is cars backing in and out and a lot of pedestrian movement, so we just want to keep it slow, but I'll have Jeff Petrie respond
I
to
know,
you.
these are bolted down. They're more vicious than any other speed bumps.
Yeah, I've been over them several times.
Yeah, even if you totally slow down, it's still bad. You go bump, bump. Okay, so I think they could take them out since they're bolted in instead of part of the concrete. And then I also was in Indianapolis, and I attended the advisory council meeting and the Energy, Environment, and Natural Resource Committee. Yeah, and we had a report from a team in Indianapolis who are working on climate recovery, and they're hoping to have a food recycling container at every house in the city. But it sounded like they've had a resolution similar to ours, but maybe not. Maybe it's more recent. And then Emily and I were at a Making Cities Livable conference in Portland, where one exciting thing I heard about was in Madison, Wisconsin, they have a downtown gathering place for homeless people, downtown shelter, day shelter, and it is supported by the city and the county and Catholic Charities. It's in the former Chamber of Commerce headquarters. And I asked about night shelter, and the person told me, this was after this presentation, I talked to the people, that they have 3 night shelters downtown. So I think, and their day shelter is called The Beacon. And I think you could Google that and learn more about it if you want to, but I think it might be a good example for us. And then I went into, we all know now that House Bill 2001 passed, and it's could be very bad news for neighborhoods, and I'm interested in knowing what can we do to resist the implementation rather than how can we adjust to it. I think sometimes people say, for climate change, they talk about adjusting instead of preventing, and I'm more interested in preventing. And I think I hope that we will get information on how we can resist. Can we change it? Do we have to do what the state says, or who's the boss of our city, us or the state? And that's all. Anyone else want to have an item? Mike.
Thank you, Betty. Along the lines of picking up Betty's thread of conversation there, I really would like to have a pretty in-depth conversation at a work session that deconstructs all of the pieces of that as soon as it's practical to do so. That's probably obviously after summer break at this point, but we've got a couple of years before full implementation, but I'm hoping we're gonna take a deep dive into that, I would assume, because of the profound implications of it.
So Robin Hostick is putting together sort of that initial, how does that impact us? We'll send that out, and then if you all would like to have a work session, we'd be happy to do that, and it would be in the fall, and we can kind of go through that information, much more detail around what's the impact of that on us specifically. We'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
And that's what you think, when you're saying deconstruct, you're thinking about the impact to us? I guess I should just clarify.
Well,
Or on our work?
for example, there's a provision in there that has a limit on the density calculation. I want to know about that, how it's written, how it's worded. Is it, because all of this is going to get tested in court. So the question is, how likely is it to stand? How likely is it to be challenged in any way? Are there local opportunities for us to address those things as well? beyond the CC&R question, which
Got
is
it.
another one for another day.
Okay.
Thank you. Claire, did you have anything? Claire on the telephone? No? Okay,
No, ma'am, thank you.
thank you. Next item is a work session on Parks and Recreation System Development Charges. And City Manager, you're going to introduce it or someone else?
Thanks, Councilor Taylor. And Carolyn, whenever you're ready to do it, go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Carolyn Burke with the Parks and Open Space Division, and with me today is Deb Gallardi with Gallardi Rothstein Group, who you might recognize as our STC consultant on the recent transportation methodology update. And so together, we are going to be walking you through a proposed update to the Parks and Recreation SDC System Development Charge methodology. And so I'll just get started. Oops, I gotta turn it on. Really, the whole impetus of updating our SDC methodology is because about a year ago, a new system plan was adopted for Parks and Recreation in Eugene. And with that system plan comes a new project list. And so that requires that we look at our methodology, incorporate those new projects into the list, and see what that means for the fee going forward. So just to, and by the way, the last time we updated the SDC was in 2007, if you're curious about that. So just to refresh your memory a little bit about the Parks and Recreation System Plan, we did a tremendous amount of community outreach around that plan to really fully understand what the community believes their needs are for Parks and Recreation. And through that effort, we developed a long-range vision for the future. And importantly, we really tried to be realistic about what is achievable in the near term. And I think that carries forward in this work that we're going to bring to you today. We had a number of guiding principles that were developed through the system plan, including serving the entire community. The SDC funding is really a critical source for building new capacity in the system and thereby addressing our equity issues in the system. So, a reminder about some of the types of projects that are anticipated in the new system plan. We talk about renovating existing facilities, that's community centers, pools, parks, and natural areas, building new facilities in areas that are currently unserved, again, addressing that equity concern. Other projects such as enhancing recreation along the Willamette River, building a new sports complex. Those are just a few of the highlights. So now as we think about the methodology and what that means for us, I know the last SDC discussion you had was about transportation, and a lot of the principles apply to this current Parks and Recreation methodology, but there's one large difference we just wanted to point out, and that's that the cost basis in transportation is based on a per vehicle trip. For Parks and Recreation, we're talking about people, and so the cost basis is the amount of new people. And we will actually explain a little bit more about that coming up here. So there's one basic SDC formula that we do, and we want to show you the math and how we kind of got to where we are today. And so I'm going to walk you, Deb and I are going to walk you through this equation, starting with the first part of the equation, which is identifying the dollar amount of projects that will go to support growth. So in order to get at what that project cost is, we start with the project list that was adopted in the system plan. And you might, this imagery may be familiar to you, of the pie. We talked about that representing the entire 30-year vision of projects that were identified in the system plan. Now, we know that all of those $380 million worth of projects do not get addressed through the SDC fee. And so our first job is to identify what portion of those projects or of that pie is it fair to assess to future growth. So you can see we started to kind of divide up the pie. And the first thing we did was to take out the priority 3 projects. We do that because those are projects that are anticipated to occur after 20 years. So priority 1s and 2s will occur within the 20-year planning horizon of the SDC methodology. Priority 3 projects will not. So we just cut them out of the equation. The next thing we did was we looked at what projects or portions of projects will be funded through other sources. So we look at the bond that was passed last year and funding that was attributed to projects on our list. We took those out. We also looked at funding that we're getting from other partners like 4J School District and some grants that we think we'll receive. We take that off of the top because we know that that does not then need to be attributed to the growth share. And finally, the red portion of the pie are those projects that are really more about preserving the existing system that we have. So that means that about the remaining 24% are the share of projects that will contribute to additional capacity in the system that will be attributed to growth. So another way of looking at this helps to explain it a couple different ways sometimes, I think, is to think of it as kind of this inverted pyramid where we start with the large $380 million project list and we whittle away at that. So first by removing the priority 3 projects, then by removing portions of projects funded through other means, and take away those that are really about preserving the existing system. And the total cost of the project supporting growth is about $93.4 million. But we didn't stop there. We actually then looked at our project list and recognize that there's a number of projects on the list, and you actually have a new printout of that list at your seats. And, you know, when we look at the list, there's a number of projects that are already in the development pipeline. And we have already identified that we will be paying for portions of those projects with the money we already have in the bank from in our current SDC improvement fund. And so to avoid double counting those projects in the future SDC, what we've done is we've subtracted the $7.8 million in balance available that we have in our current SDC fund from the total project list, which brings us to what we're calling the calibrated project list, brings us back down to about $85.6 million. So with that then, we go back to our equation and we now have the first component of that equation. And next we're going to talk about equivalent population, and I'm going to hand it over to Deb to do that.
Oh, okay. Okay, good evening. As Carolyn mentioned, it is a pretty simple formula. Cost divided by number of units gives you the base SDC. Of course, the devil's in the details, and Carolyn explained on how we come up with the cost. I'm going to talk about how we come up with the industry term equivalent population to get at that cost per equivalent unit. And the SDCs are basically impact fees. So what we are estimating is whether or not all park users have the same potential impact on the system. So whether you're talking about a resident or an employee coming in from out of town, or a visitor who's spending the night in a hotel or motel. And generally, the answer is that no, not everyone has the same type of impact. If you think about, employees who come in from out of town to work in the city, have fairly limited time, perhaps over their lunch hour, before or after work, or maybe use the parks, some of the linear parks, as a way to get to work on the bike paths and things. So we have to come up with some defensible and equitable estimate of the relative impact of all of those potential users, both in terms of residential and non-residential, with respect to both the overnight accommodation visitors and base employees. Eugene was one of the first cities to develop a intercept survey to actually be able to, in a statistically valid way, determine that impact for those user groups. And that was an extensive study done in 2004. And really, there was no need to update that this go-round. Same base assumptions are still applicable and defensible. There are a handful of other communities across the country who have done similar surveys. Your results were within the range of those. And there are cities who use your data to support their own impact fees. In California, there's a number of cities, because there are very strict guidelines about developing a nexus between the charges and the use. So this study utilizes that same information in basically the same set of assumptions that are in the current methodology to develop these equivalency factors for different use. And you can see in the slide that, for the general population, we assume a 1-to-1 equivalency, that every resident has a potential to use the parks. And for visitors, that equivalency is 0.44, and for employment, it's 0.2. So it goes down as we look at these different categories in terms of employees are assumed to have the potential least amount of impact when we look at all of that user base. And this, based on the survey, there was a stakeholder engagement process during the last update, which helped to identify specifically how to apply the results of the survey to determine these equivalencies. And these recommendations, information that we're presenting today, follow those same recommendations. So using those equivalency factors, we come up with the denominator of that unit cost equation of 48,469 equivalent population units over that same 20-year period. So we're trying to spread the costs that Carolyn mentioned, the 85 million, over the number of equivalent users over that same period of time. And you can see how in the pie chart here, this is a different pie and different way of slicing the resident equivalents, that the general residential population is allocated about 84% of users, and employment about 15%, and visitors 1%. And that's, the units are basically, for example, for employment, is the total employment over the 20-year period times that 0.2 factor. So it's not that we're estimating 7,000 new employees, it's just that once discounted by that factor, that's the number of equivalent units. The projections of population and employment all come from your other planning documents and using consistent assumptions. So doing the math then of the 85.6 million divided by the number of resident equivalents generates a cost per unit of 2,388. That is used then to determine the SDCs for each land use category. So the last step in the process is to take that 2388, which is in the top circle, and multiply it by the number of people for each new development unit that comes for a permit to the city, and multiply that by that same equivalency factor. So for example, for single-family residential, we take the 2,388 unit costs times the estimated number of people per dwelling unit, which, based on current census data, is 2.51 people. And because that assumed equivalency is a 1-for-1 ratio, it's a simple multiplication of the 2388 times 2.51, which yields an SDC of 5,992 for a single-family dwelling unit. For multifamily, it's the same math, just different assumption about people per dwelling unit, again, based on the census data. And multifamily, on average, has fewer people per dwelling unit, in this case, 1.76. So the SDC would be 4,202. That's if the SDC were continued to be assessed on an average dwelling unit, one size fits all. The trend in the industry to address, as was mentioned in your opening comments, housing affordability issues, as well as equity in terms of looking at as we look at house size, either in terms of square footage or number of bedrooms, do we see a difference in occupancy levels? And we were able to utilize information from both the census detailed sample information, as well as information from Lane Council of Governments on square footage to come up with estimates of persons per household for different size dwelling units for single family. So I'll present to you what that might look like under this kind of progressive rate structure where the fee is scaled based on the size of the house. For multifamily, we don't have the same kind of information on square footage, just because the way the data is kept in the assessor's office, which is not, unique to Eugene. It's more difficult to look at multifamily in the same way. But we have very good data from the census that we can estimate on average, based on the number of bedrooms, how many occupants per dwelling. So this next table shows you the results in that first column, the persons per household for the different categories, first for single family and then for multifamily. And we've assumed that an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, is basically the same category as the very small 800 square foot or less, so it has the same occupancy assumptions. And then you can see how, as you go up in categories, and the number of categories is somewhat a policy decision. It's, we tried to come up with something that would be administratively feasible, not too onerous, and but yet have enough differentiation so that really those smaller units would get a lower charge. And you can see that the fees under this kind of progressive rate structure, instead of being the $59.92 average, range from just under $3,000 per unit to over $8,000 per unit for the largest homes over 3,000 square feet. And that's related, again, back to those occupancy numbers. So you would actually have dwellings on the lower end of this tiered scale that would be charged significantly lower than they are today. Same concept for multifamily, but again, it's based on bedrooms instead of square feet. And the city of Bend actually just adopted a similar kind of rate structure where they did differentiate multifamily based on bedrooms and and single family based on square feet. One of the issues with bedrooms for single family is there's often, difficulty in saying, well, that room, is that really a bedroom, or is that a den, or is that, an office? With multifamily, there doesn't tend to be so many additional rooms. It's either a bedroom or not. So, and because the data is much more defensible on the bedrooms, that's why we have the one based on square footage and the other based on bedrooms. But you can see here that for 0 bedrooms, just over 1 person, and then up to, when you get to a 3 bedroom or higher for multifamily, the occupancy is not dissimilar to a single family average. One thing to note that for multifamily, the census data on average shows the occupancy rate for multifamily to be higher than what the current methodology assumed. That's why you don't see as large of negative numbers for multifamily as you do for single family, where the average occupancy really didn't change much. So just then to talk a little bit about non-residential, we have not recommended any change to the current approach, which is basically instead of units, when we look at non-residential occupancy rates, here we're trying to estimate generally employees per per building. And the number of employees is a function of both the size of the building and the type of use. So a warehouse is going to have a lot fewer employees per square foot than an office or a restaurant. So and then there's the equivalency factor. So for example, for office, we determined that the SDC, based on taking that same 2388 unit cost system-wide, and we multiply by the assumed employment density per 1,000 square feet, and then multiply that by that same equivalency factor, the 0.2. And so you can see for, based on each 1,000 square feet for a non-residential, in this case office, the SDC is significantly lower. It's 1,576. And for a hotel, the units are basically rooms, and we were able to get average occupancy information from the local Travel Eugene data. And so the updated cost per hotel room turns out to be $24.16. And here's a comparison. You have 5 different categories of non-residential, basically hotel motel, which is again based on rooms, and then 4 different employment type categories: office, industrial, retail, general services, and warehouse. And you can see what the rates for those would be in comparison. Generally, they go up all at about the same percent compared to the current rate, because again, we're not suggesting any significant change in the methodology or the assumptions associated with non-residential development. Okay, back to Carolyn.
You can see why she explained that portion of the methodology. So I do want to just recognize that fee increases are a difficult conversation, especially when we have all these other priorities that are being considered and are important to our community. And we've tried to balance those to the best that we can. We think that a lot of the community priorities are consistent with the mission of parks and with projects on our list. And as far as affordable housing goes, we've looked at that progressive rate structure to try to lessen the impact on that issue. And another strategy that we can look at is looking at a phased approach. And so this phased approach, this is one example where we would phase in the fee increase over a 5-year period of time. So basically, in incremental steps, we would build up until we hit the full rate increase 5 years out. An implication of that is that we are not generating the full amount of revenue to support the project list. And so in essence, we're kind of moving some of the projects out into a later time horizon. And so another option to reduce that implication is we could look at a 3-year phased-in approach. Same concept here, just over phasing it into the full project amount over a shorter time frame. We thought that it would be helpful to see where we compare with other Oregon communities. And so in this slide, all of the blue bars are Eugene. The first blue bar is our current rate and how we compare it to the others. The middle blue bar shows where we would be in comparison to the other communities after a year 1 phased approach in the 3-year phasing plan. And then the final blue bar shows where we would be in comparison at the full rate. And we wanted to show that phased-in approach in this graph because it is likely that some of the communities on this list will also be updating their methodology and increasing their rates in the next several years, so this isn't necessarily a static chart. And then the final option that we did want to talk about was just reducing the project list. And this is something that we can do. We can do a variety of different options, but one is if we didn't want any increase at all, that would mean a $35 million reduction to our current project list, and those projects would essentially be pushed out into phase 3 and beyond. And then there are other examples of how we could reduce the project list if that was something that we needed to do. So where we are today is we're not asking for any decisions, but we're interested in hearing your perspective. We plan on coming back in October for another work session where we would present a draft methodology. At that point, we would like to publish that in order to do our public hearing notice, do a public hearing around the end of the year or early next year, and then hopefully move towards adoption in the January or February of next year. So with that, we can take questions.
Thank you. That was very clear. I have one person in the queue so far, Mike. Mike?
Thank you, Betty. Hey, really, thank you very much for the report, but most of all, thank you for the reduce the project list page. That's not been done before, and I appreciate that. That's a very balanced approach of how should we deal with the implications of this, and thank you for that. That was awesome. So it took a lot of the steam out of the things I was going to say, and now I'm a lot more reasonable, probably. All during the transportation SDC discussion, I said we're going to see Parks SDC's increases of 50% too. Just wait. And there are a couple of people at the table who kind of suggested that we don't know that yet. Now, that may not be the case, but would you say it's true that most of the homes that are built here are most of the single-family homes are between 1,500 and 3,000 square feet, and that most of the apartments are 2 bedrooms or better in our community? Because knowing what I know, I'd say most of them probably are. So most of the housing that we're going to see built over the next few years is going to have at least a 52% increase in SDCs for parks and the single-family home, and all multifamily, which is our big goal, is going to have a 77% increase in SDCs. So that means costs are that much more and rents are that much more. And so I think we're in the midst of a housing crisis right now. I don't think I'm alone in that thinking. I think that the other communities above us in relative cost aren't in the same scope and scale of housing crisis that we're in. And I think that it's interesting to me that in all transportation planning, there is always an element of demand management. And there's no demand management in parks. There are no demand management strategies. And I'm certainly of the mind that we should, that our parks make us special and the people who live here love them. But we also love ice cream every night and, you know, lots of other things that we can't maybe necessarily afford, even though we love them. And I would suggest that the impact to housing with this high of an increase is beyond what we can afford, and we should look at ways to scale that demand back. I'd also wonder, project list right here, okay? Is this a 30-year list?
20.
Okay, because we went from 7 to 20 a while in the 07 list, right?
I think that was 20 as well.
Yeah, the 07 list was a 20-year list, but I'm saying prior to that, it was always a 7-year list, and then in 07, we went to a 20-year list, right?
I can't speak to.
Roxy told me this, and I remember it, so yeah, I know we did. The point is, what would you say is the percentage of the projects on the 07 list that are also on this one?
I would need to do some analysis to look at that. I couldn't tell you.
I absolutely want the answer to that question in writing in an email. That's a very important thing, because we based all of the SDCs we charged everybody, 07 through, on these lists, and I want to know how many of them we actually built.
Would you like a second round, Mike?
I would, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I also appreciate the presentation, and I also appreciate your willingness to provide the variables that could be tweaked and worked with. And I agree, variables around the rate, variables around the timeline, those are important, and even variables around what's on the list and what's not on the list. I think those are all important. But one variable that really is impactful for me was your effort to try to figure out how to not create an undue impact on housing affordability at the level where our crisis is most apparent, and that is in lower square footage, lower cost homes. That's what people can't afford right now. If you build a 3,000 square foot home, a starter family can't afford that house anyway, no matter how you want to slice it. So my interest is in figuring out a way to get people into homes that they can afford and to have the least impact on those homes in the systems we're creating here. And so I'm particularly impressed with the fact that you've tried to look for ways to reduce the impact on the housing types that are in greatest need for working families here in Eugene. And those are homes, I'm pulling a number out of the air because we've used it before, $250,000 a year or less. And try to create less of an impact on those. And those homes are going to be lower square footage. And so whatever we can do to try to make that point or try to reinforce that as much as we can, I think is the right track. And I think that's what you're trying to do. And I would continue to try to do that. But if we need to look at what we can do to keep that balance in place, either with the timeline or with the project list or whatever, I'm supportive of. But I think you're moving in the right direction. You've got the right thinking in terms of trying to make the impact on housing affordability for those people who want to get into their first home or smaller homes as minimal as you can. So I appreciate that.
Alan?
Thanks for this presentation. It's very helpful and well done on a very complicated formula and explaining how it works. The one part that I didn't get was on slide 9, which is the inverted pyramid. And that was going from the orange to the red, which was going from the excluded $55 million, got that part. Excellent, that one. So the 171 million, I follow all the way through there, but then you go from 171 to 93.4, and that's where you lost me.
Well, I didn't include the amount subtracted from the 171. If anyone good at math on what's 93 from 171, those are the projects that do not support growth. So looking at this previous slide, those orange projects are projects that weren't otherwise excluded, except they don't add capacity to the system. They're more about preservation, and that was $70-80 million worth of projects that we excluded to get to the 93.4.
So in our spreadsheet, so the costs across the top, the columns, rehabilitation costs, new capacity costs, and growth costs. So the rehabilitation costs are the non-growth supported rehabilitation of existing parks. And then the new capacity cost is directly related to SDCs. And then growth
partially.
costs is sometimes different.
So rehabilitation costs 100% are in that other orange slice of the pie, the non-SDC.
Right.
Plus a portion of new capacity costs, where we are raising the level of service for a particular type of park or recreation service. For example, the current number of square feet of community centers currently is lower, square feet per person is lower than what this list, when fully implemented, would yield. And so that increase in the level of service, meaning less crowded gyms and, performance space and those sorts of things, everybody benefits from that. So growth, you're charging growth at that new standard, but you can't use SDCs to raise existing development to that standard. So that's the other component of that. So it's two things. It's rehabilitation plus increase in level of service that benefits existing development.
Right, so that growth cost column
Exactly.
adds up to the $93.4 million. So not all expansion costs go directly into, or go into the growth cost or SDC bucket.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense to me. So the next question I had was related to slide 17, which was the option progressive residential rate structure. And this relates to something that Chris just said. So this is a pretty big change in the way that we're doing things in that what we've done that one. So if you look at the current rate, we're at basically one size fits all, meaning all the size of housing has the same 42, 46 SDC rate. In this new one, we're changing it and we're relating the SDC size to the size of the house. And I think that's a pretty significant change. It also addresses the thing that Chris said, which was affordability. The larger, it's not absolute, but the larger the home, the less affordable it is. And so having lower SDCs for smaller units like ADUs and 800 to 1,500 square feet makes a significant difference than if we were just to say everybody, like we have done in the past, everybody's just 59.92.
Correct.
So that addresses some of the affordability in that we are doing an increase, but it's not across the board, but it's still an increase. But actually for really small homes, it's a decrease. So for small 800 square foot homes, we're actually seeing a decrease in the SDC. So that adds to that affordability equation. And it's pretty modest with regard to the next size up, 800 to 1,500 square feet. So I got that right.
You do.
Okay, good.
Would you like another round?
I would like another round.
Okay. Greg?
So this is really making my head hurt because, there is a necessity for us to be able to pay for the development that the community demands. At the same time, we're going to be outpacing ourselves in terms of our goals with affordable housing and being able to do that. What is the impact of SDC waivers on this equation, if any? As we decide, okay, we'll waive SDCs on a project in order to help pencil that out, make that more affordable, those kinds of things.
We currently do have a procedure where for subsidized affordable housing, we do waive those We do waive those fees, and they come out of a separate fund that we have identified for those.
So that's not part of this calculation then?
I don't believe so, no. And so my understanding is there wouldn't be any change in that process. We would continue to offer those waivers, and it would not impact this.
Right, so there are some projects now, could be the traditional affordable housing projects in which the project doesn't pay the SDC, something else pays the SDC or some other mechanism.
Trade-off.
Yes, and we've also, as you know, in a couple of cases, and one you just went forward with a couple weeks ago, is the project's not paying the SDCs, but the future property tax coming in will be slated to pay those SDCs. So the SDCs themselves are paid, it just is a matter of, is it the project or is there another fund that pays for them? And as I recall with SDC, with the project not paying for them, there's so much set aside per year. And so as projects line up, they have the eligible projects can have SDCs paid differently as long as there's still money in that account. We can provide some more detail on that, but.
And then I go back to the slide where you have the single-family comparison rate by city. And while our projected comparison would be closer to Corvallis, I just want to note that all the ones that are on the right side of that chart that are going skyrocketing high, like Lake Oswego and Tualatin and West Lynn, that the people who are buying homes in this community are not making the kinds of incomes that people are making in those communities. And so we have a, this is where my headache comes in. We have a problem here with being able to create a window of affordability that makes sense and then support the parks and the other pieces of infrastructure that SDCs are dedicated to doing. So I'm just making that as an editorial comment, not necessarily a question.
Finished? Anyone else? Okay.
Could I get in the queue, Betty?
Claire?
Claire wants the queue.
Yeah, Claire, go ahead.
Thank you. So thanks for the presentation. I share some of the concern about some of the big increase on some of the forms of housing units, but I also appreciate the progressive approach, which, as I think Alan pointed out, results in a reduction for ADUs and smaller homes. And I also note that in multifamily, a 3-bedroom unit is still paying less than the kind of moderate size housing, the 1,600 to 3,000 square foot single family structure. So, I would prefer not to cut off any of our projects. I think we put a lot of work into coming up with our project list and figuring out what our needs are in this projected horizon. And I would, be interested in that phasing over 3 years so we can get to capacity sooner. But I was wondering, and I know the methodology was different when we did this in 2007, but I'd like to see what those percentage increases were for the grouping of housing types that we did use in 2007, just for comparison's sake.
Okay, we can get that.
Thanks. That's all for me. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Second round, Mike?
Thank you, Betty. So let me see if I restate this, if my math is right here, that if we were to instead say we want 0 increase to SDCs, we want no increase of any kind, that we would increase the capacity of our park system within this plan by $58 million worth of new projects instead of 93. Did I get that right?
Can you say that one more time?
If we decided we're not going to increase SDCs at all, we would be increasing our parks capacity by $58 million and not $93 million?
Yeah, please.
Well, you use the term capacity, and I would just say you would be spending $53 million.
New addition. I apologize. Aren't the SDCs and aren't the specific categories that you nailed down, that 21% specifically to serve new capacity?
Yes, correct, yes.
So the 93 million is already broken down into its role of serving new capacity, right?
Correct.
Okay, so if we had no increase, we would spend 58 million new dollars to serve new capacity rather than 93 million. That's my question.
Yeah, the 51 million, yes, correct.
Thank you. I think that's enough. I think in the middle of a housing crisis, it's a better decision. I like what you did as well with the tiering of smaller units seeing a decrease. I think that's wise. I think we should discount them entirely if we want to see them built, actually. I actually don't think that many of those will be built based on cost and a few other factors, not based on regulation, or in this particular case, that motivation of that small decrease, but I think that helps. I still think we will see most of what gets built have a massive increase and thus see housing overall continue to increase in cost. So I would prefer that we not increase the cost of housing and at the same time increase our parks capacity by $58 million, because that's the actual choice. I really want to emphasize again the importance of seeing the projects on the last 20-year list, 07 to 27, that are the same in terms of percentages here. Because last year in 18, when I asked that question, the answer was that we had accomplished, I think, don't hold me to this, I might be wrong, but my recollection was that we had accomplished about 15% of that 20-year list at 11 years through. Am I close to right? It may have been a little higher than that, but my point is it wasn't close to half of them. And I want to know how many of them transferred onto this list that we now have had for 13 years, 12 years. So that's really important to me, and I'll look forward to getting that email. Thank you.
Thank you. For the second round, I have Alan, Chris, and Greg. Correct? Alan.
So that chart there, that's an important chart. In part, right now we're staying at the bottom third of that chart. It's not all the big cities in all the cities in Oregon. If we increase it the full amount, we're still at the midpoint of the grouping. I'm curious, I'd like to see data on where Springfield stands and where Albany stands and where Portland stands in that grouping as well. I know you can't do every single city in Eugene or in Oregon, but I would like to see that. The other question I have is, what the hell's going on in Roseburg and Ashland? I mean, they're so far off the mark compared to everybody else. They got to be doing something completely different.
Well, I know Ashland, I've talked to them about 6 months ago, and they're looking to update. They recognize how low they are, and they just haven't updated in a very, very long time. I can't speak to Roseburg.
Okay, it might be just that they haven't got to it, updated their methodology.
Project list.
And when was the last time we did this? 2007?
7.
So it's been 12 years since we've updated this increase. So if you think about that on an annual basis, if we just did an annual basis of a couple of percent a year, you'd be at 50% pretty quickly, or 40%, sorry. And then on slide 24, the next slide. So what this means is if we lower the increase, we do less projects.
Correct.
Right? And we still do quite a big list of projects. So the options to ameliorate the impact on affordable housing in particularly are twofold. One, we can phase it in, 3 to 5 year kind of thing, that helps a little bit. or we can reduce the percentage, which, and that gets us to a lower number as well. Interesting trade-off there is that one of the things about parks is that it increases the livability and the special place that Eugene is by having good park system. And people want to live here in part because of that. And at the same time, we're making houses a little bit less affordable. I guess a third option would be to look at that scale where it's gradient, where there's a gradient, and make sure that the lower end of the scale, where we're talking about affordable housing, not the large houses, but the smaller houses, maybe even has maybe even below 1,500 as a 0% increase. I'd like to see that and see what it does to the other larger homes. So that would be a trade-off of having lower increases on the smaller homes, 0 to a negative, and larger increases for the larger homes.
Time is up.
So where were you suggesting that break at? 1,500 and lower?
Get it down to 0.
Okay.
Thank you. We're running short of time, but we have 2 more people for second round. Chris?
Thank you. I'll try to go quickly. To me, this boils down to 2 conversation points or variable points. The first one is the what you do, and the second one is how you do it. I think under the conversation of what you do, it's really the balancing act between the list of projects, the time you're going to take to do them, and then the dollars that you'll allocate to it. And I think that's something we can continue to work on. I think you have all 3 of those you can work with, so I think we can try to figure out how we can find an appropriate balance for those. So I wanted to focus on the second one, which is the how you do it. And as was pointed out before, the current rate is basically a one-size-fits-all. So whether we chose dollar amount A or dollar amount B, I still like the notion, and I think this is what Alan was alluding to, of the progressive scale, where we can say, even if we don't change the current rate, I would still want to change the way it's applied, how we do it, so that there was a progressive scale involved. Because I think we need to do specific and explicit things to encourage the development of smaller, more affordable housing. And if we can use an SDC adjustment to try to make the burden at a higher square foot to relieve the burden at the lower square foot in the more affordable homes, I'm fully supportive of that. So I think the what we do is where there can be a lot of conversation around the time, the projects, and the dollars. But I think in terms of the how we do it, I think the progressive rate is moving in the right direction, and we should continue to explore how we can do that in a way that really encourages development of housing in the more affordable range, because I think that's something we have to do.
Thank you. Greg?
And maybe you can't answer this question, but along the same lines as what Chris was just talking about, how many developers do we have left in Eugene that are developing single-family units in the 1,200 to 1,600 square foot range? Are they basically being scared out of that market by a variety of different fees, including SDCs?
We'll have to get back to you on that. My guess is Carolyn isn't prepared to answer that question.
Well, I'm just, I'm saying this because I know that Hayden has been one of those developers that has done a lot of that work in West Eugene, and particularly in Bethel. And those houses just go like that. But the prices of those houses are just going up and skyrocketing. What was once $133,000 home at 1,400 square feet is now $250 or more, and that's not sustainable in the long run.
Yeah, so we'll just have to get back to you and ask Denny for his folks to put some of that information together.
I've heard anecdotal information that even Hayden is thinking about not doing developments in Eugene anymore, but I would like to know that information so that we would have that.
Okay.
Thank you. And Emily would like a first round, and we won't have time for a third round.
Basically, working off of what Greg said, if we make too much of it 0, then the bigger houses have to pay everything. And so in that, we have to make sure that the builders can still make some money. If we're making them just build little houses, because it's just, we got to really be careful here of how we adjust it, because yes, we want more housing, we want more affordable housing, we want more low-income housing, but we also need builders to continue to invest in Eugene. And I think we're getting to a tricky point of balance here. So as we go forward, I want us to not get too excited about, yes, we'll do all this, we'll get all the housing we need. Great, but are we going to have anybody to put the money in and build the houses? So let's not forget that. Thank you, and thanks for the presentation. That was a lot of math, I loved it.
Thank you, but we have another item which is important, and we need to get into that. The presiding judge interview, and Becky DeWitt's going to take over.
Thank you, ladies. Greg, I'll tell you about that after.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Becky DeWitt from the City Manager's Office. I'm here on behalf of Human Resources. In some past work sessions, you had indicated an interest in interviewing interim presiding judge, Judge Gill, for the position of Municipal Court presiding judge. So we've brought Judge Gill here graciously tonight to be able to respond to some questions that we've worked together to pre-prepare in advance. How this will go tonight is I will ask the questions of Judge Gill, he can respond, and then if there's any follow-up time at the end, there can be some follow-up questions. You are also scheduled to talk about this position on Wednesday, so if Judge Gill needs to come back for some additional follow-up questions, he said he can make himself available to do that. All right, let's get started. Please take a moment to tell us about yourself and your career and how it has progressed to your interest in the role of presiding municipal court judge.
Thank you. Council members, thanks for having me tonight. I appreciate it. We do not have a slideshow, so it's all just right here. I appreciate that. It's good to finally see all of you in one spot. I've met with some of you before this. I wish I could have met with all of you. Haven't been able to do that, though. I'm originally from Colorado, born and raised there. After high school, I went to college in Southeast Washington. That was my first taste of the Pacific Northwest, Whitman College in Walla Walla. After graduating there, I joined the Marine Corps. I was in the Marine Corps for just about 4 years, artillery officer in 5th Battalion, 10th Marines in the 2nd Marine Division over on the East Coast. After that, while I was still near the end of my tour, I met my wife, Elizabeth, Liz, and convinced her somehow to go across the country to Eugene for school, and graduated here from the University of Oregon Law School. After graduating, I became a clerk, judicial clerk for Karsten Rasmussen. Wonderful experience and learned a bunch. After that, I was an associate for a year at a local law firm, Arnold Gallagher. Then joined another law firm, which is now known as Gardner Potter Budge. It's gone through several iterations since then. And it was at that time that I really began to really practice law. I was more or less a solo practice. I was still doing a lot of the commercial litigation that I did with Arnold Gallagher, but I dove into the domestic relations and criminal defense fields, those things that tend to be the bread and butter for those who go out on their own, at least at the beginning. And found that criminal defense, although I never thought it would be my cup of tea, was actually a lot of fun and extraordinarily interesting. And so my bend became towards criminal defense. And in a weird turn of events, somewhere along the way, became the city prosecutor for the city of Coburg. Because they were different municipalities, I was practicing criminal defense in Eugene, as well as with the Lane County Defense Consortium here, the circuit courthouse. I was able to prosecute in the city of Coburg with very few conflicts, which was nice, but it was an extraordinarily beneficial learning experience. And then in 2013, when I was very busy, Judge Wayne Allen asked me to come aboard and be a judge at the Eugene Municipal Courthouse. And so since 2013, I've been a judge there. My role there has slowly ramped up until 2016. I became the associate judge there in the place of Judge Mary Morey after she retired, and then was in that role joining boards like the Victim Impact Panel Board, part of the Vision Zero that's come through council, until Judge Allen retired last December in 2018. And since then, I've been the interim presiding judge for the municipal court. And so that's the short version of how I got here. The interest in the presiding judge is a really funny question. I thought about that and how I would articulate an answer to that. My mind kept going back to one answer, however, and it's the court itself. It's everything that makes up the court, the thing that got me hooked on being a part of the court in 2013, and even before then as a defense attorney. The people that work there are amazing people. You can tell that the staff really care about their jobs. They do a wonderful job. I could tell that right away. The judges were also amazing. They were people who understood the law, understood a courtroom, understood the dynamics of a courtroom, but also what might come in front of them on a case-by-case basis. And each one of them was reasonable. Each one of them was a good mentor. And when I came aboard, I was able to work with them shoulder to shoulder and learn that even more so. And so now that I'm in this position of the interim presiding judge, I don't really want to do anything more. I wouldn't want to do anything else besides continue with this court, keep the court moving in the direction that it's in, sharpen what I can sharpen, and make sure that it continues to do the good work that it does.
Thank you very much. The community court has been an important initiative in the city of Eugene. Please tell us about your involvement in developing the community court as well as your goals for the current program.
Just so you know, I brought some notes with me. I got a list of the questions a little bit ahead of time, and so I put down notes because I wanted to make sure that I hit all of the marks that I thought I needed to hit without forgetting anything, although I probably will forget one anyway. So back when I started with the court, it was either late 2013 or 2014. Judge Allen threw a DVD on my desk and said, I want you to watch that. Tell me what you think. The title of this DVD was Testing New Ideas, Evidence, Innovation, and the Community Court. And so I popped this DVD in back when you had a computer that you could actually put a DVD into. And there was a special about these community courts and the movement for community courts. Most of it was primarily based in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, colonial Northeast. But there were some in the West Coast as well, Seattle, San Francisco. And so I got to watch the presentation about what a community court actually was. And that's where I learned some of the basics about how a community court is there to try to solve underlying issues for persons charged with low-level offenses and try to help them fix the problems, provide these off-ramps or up-ramps or however you want to determine or phrase it, and then be able to pull themselves out from their own power, the position that they were in, to try to reduce recidivism, increase someone's involvement in the community, and put them in a better place than where they started. These interviews included community courts out there like Red Hook or Brownsville or the Midtown Manhattan, Newark Community Solutions, and theirs was a very formal but still community-based solution. So anyway, I watched this video, told Judge Allen that I'm all in. I don't know why he showed it to me, but it was exactly where I thought this community needed to go, where this city needed to go. We have the formal, the traditional basis. We can try a case in our court, just like in any court, but we needed a tool to be able to address a lot of the problems that we were starting to see around us, homelessness, mental illness, and substance abuse, that this court in this community, that this city really needed to address. The community court was definitely a vehicle that could make that happen. And so over the next few years, after the court applied for a grant from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, as well as the Center for Court Innovation, got that grant with help from the City Council, was able to plan the community court here in this community. 2 years later, in September of 2016, we rolled it out. During that planning process, I was a part of every meeting, every stakeholder, every community partner. We worked with EPD, we worked with the defense attorneys, we worked with the city prosecutor's office, we worked with some of the local providers that would eventually become part of the community court, and we worked with other partners in the community who would eventually be affected, or hopefully in the positive, by the community court, like the downtown crew, the downtown businesses, as well as some of the businesses off in other places. And so after working with all of these people, I don't know if you remember if when the survey went out, the court conducted a survey to find out what the community thought were some of the most pressing needs of the community, what the court should address. And after reviewing the results of that survey, we decided what charges were going to be qualifying. And then we started the community court in 2016, September. I was a part of every staffing moving forward, so every Friday morning we were at the Eugene Public Library talking about each of the participants that were charged with crimes that were part of the program. And then part of the evolution as the court figured out who it wanted to be, where the community court, how it was going to evolve and how it was going to mirror the needs of the city of Eugene, specifically the downtown catchment area, which is where the community court was focused. And then we felt pretty good about what we were doing. I mean, we still feel pretty good about what we're doing. But the reason I say that is because after attending summits in San Francisco and going down to Birmingham and being able to talk with other people, we actually went back to the Northeast to visit these places that I saw on this DVD in early 2014. And I got to talk with the judges who were part of these courts, Judge Calabrese, Judge Cynthia Pratt, and really asked them the hard questions that I had developed over the years since we started the community court. I know Judge Allen did the same thing. And through those answers, I was able to realize that what we have done with our court was exactly right for what we need as a community. There's no way that the city of Eugene was going to copycat someplace in New York or New Jersey or Seattle for that matter. It has to reflect the needs of this community. And so the more questions I asked of these judges, the more confident I was in our model. And so when Judge Allen was going to retire and asked if I wanted to become the community court judge, that was an easy half a second answer of absolutely. I was honored. And since he retired, I haven't looked back.
Thank you. What do you see as the role of the municipal court, and what are the key values you think it should operate with?
I think that's an extraordinarily tough question because I think you're going to get a different answer from every judge, from every attorney that you ask. But in my opinion, the role of a municipal court is twofold. It really has two roles. One is the traditional role, right? This is the one where the court was actually created to uphold, right? Someone's been charged with a criminal offense. You need to have a court to be able to adjudicate that offense, right? The prosecution needs to have a venue where they can prosecute the case. A defendant needs to have a space where the defendant's rights are completely upheld, and it's a fair and neutral, unbiased venue to make sure that the case can become adjudicated properly. And the role of a municipal court is to make sure that that can happen, right? It's a very involved process, this traditional court system, right? Someone's put under arrest. The court's involved almost from the get-go. There are a whole bunch of pretrial procedures. There's a determination on whether someone should and can be held in custody. There are pretrial arraignment procedures. There's the arraignment process itself. Pretrial motions, other pretrial proceedings. There's the decision of a person who wants to actually go to trial to actually have a trial, which is an extraordinary event each and every time it happens in and of itself. And the court's there to make sure that that trial goes off fairly, and if a person is convicted, that the sentence is appropriate to the crime, to the defendant, and to the circumstances of every particular case. All right, so the court, for that traditional court process, has to be prepared for every single defendant that's charged with a criminal offense to be able to hold that burden per person, all right? In the city of Eugene, as I'm sure you've all heard, on an average basis, this city charges more than 5,000 misdemeanors every single year. And that's second, as I'm sure you've heard before, in the state of Oregon, only behind Multnomah County, right? And that's Multnomah County Circuit Court. That's not any municipality in that county. And so this court, and my idea of a municipal court is, for every single person that's charged with the crime, you have to be able to have that trial if that defendant wants that trial. They have to be represented by an attorney if they want to be represented by an attorney, and they have to have that venue that I described. It's a hard process. But that's role number one. The second role is that a municipal court absolutely has to reflect the community that it's in, right? And that kind of peels a layer away from that formal process, that process that you're going to find in the circuit courts of the state of Oregon, you're going to find in the federal process. That's got to be unique to the community that it's in, right? So that role of reflecting the community has to understand and candidly admit what problems it sees that comes through, what the problems of the community are, what the needs of the community are, the kind of charges that come through, why those charges might happen in the first place, right? It really has to try its best to put its finger on the pulse of what it sees on a day-to-day basis, right? The court's not generating criminal behavior. The court's not charging the crimes. The court is there to receive the charges and to make sure that they can become adjudicated. But that doesn't abdicate the court of its responsibility to make sure that it understands the community which it's in, which is very hard to do. And I would argue, and I think the judges that are involved and the attorneys that are involved and the court staff that are involved in this, it is much harder to become involved in your community that way than it is through the formal judicial process. Because you're talking with defendant after defendant after defendant. You're talking with defense attorneys. You're talking with the prosecutors. You're talking with stakeholders. You're talking with community members. You're talking with council members. You're talking with Joe and Jane on the street that you meet and say, hey, what is this? You know what, I went to your court and it wasn't fair. And that's ripe for discussion as to what happened and why. Right? You got to understand the community that you're in. And so the role of the municipal court has to be able to hold these both these characteristics all at the same time, which is tough. But another reason, going back to the question about becoming involved in this court, is why I like this court and why I love this court so much, is because this court, out of all places, is a place where that duality can actually exist. We'll have a trial, and we're going to have a trial the right way if someone charged with a crime wants to do it because it's their absolute constitutional right. Right? But if there's a way that we can identify maybe what's going on with this particular person, maybe this person can resolve his or her case in a different way, fantastic. Let's do it. Let's make sure that the right thing happens, because that's the right thing to do. And so the values of a court basically have to be that it's neutral, that it's fair, that it's efficient, but that it's effective, right? It's, in this court, our mantra, that was the mantra when I started, and it will be the mantra as long as I'm there, is to make sure that every person is held accountable, but they're going to be held accountable with help.
Great, thank you. Looking toward the future, what would your vision be for our municipal court in 5 years?
That's a good dovetail from the last question. A vision that I have would be an absolutely strong traditional court. To make sure that our attorneys are seasoned attorneys. They understand the requirements of defending a client who comes in, whether it's indigent defense or a retained attorney. Make sure our prosecutors understand exactly the dynamics of going to case and can try a case. Make sure the judges are well informed, that they are performing their judicial role of being fair, neutral, making decisions, and making sure that these cases can go from start to finish in a fair and efficient manner. That's an absolute goal for the next 5 years, and it should be the goal for every single year after that. But then it's also the programs within that traditional process that the courts developed to address that second layer, that second role, like the mental health court that's there. My goal for the mental health court would be to continue what it's doing, but make it a dual diagnosis court. The court's been trying to do that forever. It's been really hard to do, dual diagnosis being someone who has an addiction, a substance abuse addiction, as well as a mental health problem or an issue, whether it's a disease or defect or otherwise. The dual diagnosis is the only way to have a mental health court, in my opinion. And I know the judges agree with that. Judge Lee, who's our mental health court judge, absolutely agrees with that. And to have any sort of purchase moving forward and make an effect in someone's life and try to reduce that recidivism for this particular population, having a dual diagnosis court with the resources available to support that court would be absolutely necessary. The community court, of course, remains strong, move forward. We have an analysis with the Center for State Courts that we have coming. I'm very anxious for this evaluation. I want to look at and see what we're doing right, what we can improve on, what we need to change, to absolutely sharpen our skills and make sure that the idea of the community court is still attaining the goals that we want it to attain. And so I'm really looking forward to getting that evaluation and looking at and crunching some numbers. And then the problem-solving docket that we have. I don't know how familiar with a lot of the counselors are with the problem-solving docket, but this is sort of the docket that we've created, has become sort of the docket of requirement. Those cases, those problem cases that don't necessarily fit nicely into the mental health court or the community court for whatever reason, but still demand some attention to say, hey, maybe this isn't the right kind of case to go on the traditional court docket. We put these in the problem-solving docket. We have attorneys that are extraordinarily thoughtful in what they do during that docket and really dig in on what might be the best solution for any particular case where a defendant might be having a lot of problems from any one of the big three: homelessness, substance abuse, mental health, mental illness, and figure out what can be done using whatever creativity we might have at hand, right? I mean, that's really the bottom line for the problem-solving docket, is to use what we've got to try to fix the problem. Of course, trying to instill best practices as we go along. But so you have the traditional and you have those other specialty problem-solving type dockets. The vision would also include the ability to have pretrial supervision. We have so many defendants that could really use an additional hand along during the pretrial process, whether it's checking in, whether it's becoming involved in processes that will help them get to their next court appearance, involve them in the resources in the community, the kind of things that the defense attorneys just don't have time to do. And then post-judgment supervision, or at least assistance. Someone has their case adjudicated. They may be on court probation and informal probation where we don't have probation officers, but these are the people that sometimes need the help the most, right? We have someone who graduates from mental health court. We have someone who graduates from community court. They don't necessarily have assistance when they graduate. They're successful, flags are waved, everybody feels good, and then they walk out on the street and they have the resources that they've connected with, but they all of a sudden don't have the structure of the court that they just come from. I think a post-judgment kind of assistance is going to be huge in decreasing the rate of recidivism for any case that comes through the court. And then the strong relationship that this court has and that I think that we have as staff and as judges with our community partners. The vision in 5 years is to make sure that all of those relationships are as strong, if not stronger, than they are right now. I'm talking with the attorneys, of course, the city prosecutor's office, and the defense, the indigent defense, as well as the defense bar at general, but with Eugene Police Department, with the Lane County Jail, with the Springfield Jail, with the Springfield Police Department, our service providers, both in the community court service provider room, and then those in general that are outside that we use and rely on a daily basis. Communication with these providers and with these partners is paramount in order to make sure that our court can function at the caliber that it needs to function at. And having good relationships with these community partners is absolutely imperative. And that's an advantage that I've had over the last 6 years, is be able to forge these relationships, get to know the persons who are involved with these partners, and have good relationships, good communication with all of these different stakeholders that we have in this community of Eugene.
Thank you very much. I want to do a time check. We only have a few more minutes. Counselor, would you all like to invite Judge Gill back on Wednesday so that we can finish up follow-up questions?
Yes, I think so. I have two people in the queue, but we're out of time.
We could extend.
Unless
We could extend.
someone want to make a motion to
Move to extend for 10 minutes.
Second.
Okay, all in favor of extending 10 minutes? Okay,
Right.
now,
Just
are you finished with the questions?
One more.
There's one left, I
We
know.
have one question left. I don't know if you want to just take a 1 minute to respond to that, and then we can give some time for the counselors to ask some follow-up questions.
Absolutely. I'll make it as short as we need to.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
What I would like to do is share the court with you. What I want you to do is come down and see the municipal court. Be there with me, be there with the judges, be there with the staff. It's an amazing place. It's filled with amazing people. We have amazing programs. We do things really well. I'm really proud of everybody that's a part of it. I want you to meet the staff, the backbone of what happens there. You can show up and see a docket run smoothly, but what you don't see is how busy and how overloaded some of the staff members really are back there, who will bend over backwards for each other to make sure something gets done. They work independently, they work as a team, but they are absolutely the reason why when I get a file on the bench, everything's ready to go. I sign documents. I must sign over 100 signatures daily, both sometimes very involved, other times pretty informal, but just need to happen anyway. But the staff make sure that it's done the exact right way. These are the people that as counsel you need to know that are there. The judges, we have over 100 years of experience of criminal justice experience, of trial court experiences among all the judges. They are extraordinarily experienced, seasoned, and they're all wonderful people. I would really like you to get to know them. They are the people who represent you to the community of Eugene.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Is there anyone, I have two people who want to speak, Mike and Alan. Is there anyone else who wants to ask? Okay, then we have 10 minutes. If there were more people, I was going to suggest 2 minutes instead of 3 minutes for, oh, we have two people, so Mike, you're on.
Thank you, Betty. Your Honor, thank you for being here today. I appreciate your time and your answers, and for that invitation at the end of the last question. I absolutely will take you up on that and come down and
Thank you.
come through. I really would like to do that. You touched on something at the end of question 4 that is important to me. Would I be fair and accurate to characterize that to overgeneralize and say that the intention of community court is to reduce recidivism?
Yes.
How much has the operations of community court so far, while we've done it, reduced recidivism?
Well, I have the data that was provided to me from that first year stint. We have the Eugene Weekly data that came out. And then
That's why I'm asking. That's where I'm going next. You figured that one out.
I
That's awesome.
understand, and it's absolutely fair that you ask, and I think that you should. My answer to that, though, Counselor, is that is the, without being able to answer for sure, that's the reason why we brought in the Center for State Courts.
Yeah.
I want them to look at all the numbers. I want them to, they are an impartial third party coming in to tell it like it is, and then when they do their analysis after their interviews, after they're analyzing the data that's sometimes available to the public, sometimes not available to the public, then I can look at recidivism and tell you what a number is, and then we can have a follow-up discussion about what that number means and then what happens after that.
Thank you very much for that answer. It's a good one. I'll look forward to that. From a very broad brush, never having sat through, as you've just invited, and learned some of the things I'm sure I could learn by coming by and touring. It has always been my opinion that as much as I like Judge Allen and respected the man, he's awesome, I would have preferred a flavor of a municipal court that was a little more firm in how it held people accountable. Okay? It is my personal temperament that I think we could have done more to hold people accountable. I think the results of the behaviors we see in our community, especially downtown, reflect that. But I may be wrong. That may not be the right approach, and so I'll look forward to that tour to learn more. But I hope that you hear there's a sentiment that leans in that direction in our community that I don't think is always measured well.
I understand. I think there's a lot of information that's anecdotal, and so sitting down and looking at numbers is going to be extraordinarily important. But that's also why I say that the court, to be a strong municipal court, has to have two methods. You have a traditional method. You have the other one that reflects the community. Accountability is in both. Yeah. And if someone is absolutely not going to become accountable for the conduct, they can always take their matter to trial.
Yeah. It's a tough balance.
Absolutely.
And your measurement of where the community is in their sense of the just there it'd be an interesting further discussion too at some point.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah.
Alan?
Sorry I couldn't meet with you, Judge, but I wish I had. You're an impressive guy.
Yeah.
I think your command and understanding of what the court does and what it's supposed to do is quite impressive, and I share your vision about where the court should be going. And Judge Allen had a very high recommendation for you and spoke very highly of you, and he was right. I can see why. Following on a question that Mike asked, how do you know the community court works? You've been involved in it. What's your gut level? There's recidivism numbers and there's some other that's not the only one. There's other things, but maybe you can talk about what your examples are of some results that you've seen, and also when are we going to see that study that you were talking about?
I don't know exactly when the analysis, the evaluation comes out. I can get that number to you. It's not quick. I wish it were, but it's not. To answer your question, I would tell you that regarding community court, you need to come to a graduation. Counselor Taylor, I said that to you when I caught you in the library peeking in our provider room. I wanted you to come to a graduation. Nothing tells you that community court is working like seeing somebody graduate, to see that feeling reverberate throughout the room for persons who are still in the program, who might be having a tough time, for those people who are trying to decide whether they want to make the program something that they want to do, come to a graduation. The last 4 graduations that I've had, maybe 5, have been extraordinarily powerful. I won't get into the details because the time is limited here, but it includes huge feats of human power. People doing some soul bearing and literally getting out of the wheelchair to get the thing done. They did it. So come to a graduation. That's when I have a graduation after graduation after graduation, when I hear the provider room humming every single Friday, filled with persons who are in the community court, but also the walk-ins who are taking or making use of the providers that are there. It's got to be well over 2,000 plus people who have taken advantage of that provider room since the beginning of this thing. And then talking to people after graduation, seeing somebody succeed, seeing somebody do it for themselves. That's how I know that if I had to do it all over again, I would do it the exact same way. Because it takes it out of the numbers realm and it puts it right there where everybody can see. And you don't know the intangible effect of having that graduation on anybody that might be in the room. Whether it's just some sort of formal process that someone wants to get through and get out of there, not have to come back to court anymore, or if it's a half-an-hour ordeal where someone's written a song, plays the guitar, breaks down in tears, someone's parents breaks down in tears, whatever the case may be. That, in a nutshell, is how I would tell you that community court absolutely works.
Yeah, right. Yeah, same with the human services. It's not necessarily the numbers, but it's the impacts on people's lives, and sometimes they just need a lift up. Some people need to be punished, but other people just need a hand up.
I think that's absolutely true. And the lift up, I would counter with some people need that hand up that you're talking about, not necessarily the social service as a handout, which the community court absolutely is not.
Yeah, right. Last question. It looks like we're going to make the presiding judge an employee of the council. And that would shift from a contractor. And so currently you're a partner in your law firm. And so how would you handle that? How would you handle your partnership and in moving forward?
That's a great question. And what I would be required to do, actually, I take that back. In these circumstances, I don't think I would be required to. But what I would do is wind down my practice, which has wound itself down after becoming interim presiding judge in early January this year by necessity. And then slowly close that practice. And if I were employee of the firm, probably no longer be a partner in that law firm. As sad as that would be, time to move on to the next step.
Okay, good. The last question was about reaching back to your geology days and how many Great Missoula floods there were, but you can answer that.
I don't know the answer to that, but I'd like to count them, right? Coming to the Northwest and counting the Missoula floods and being introduced with the Missoula floods where it was amazing.
Yeah,
and anything having to do with the Columbia River basalt formations, the accretions, the atolls that are outside, extraordinarily interesting.
Yeah.
So anytime we can check, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming.
Councilor Taylor,
And
thank you.
we will be continuing this discussion on Wednesday in executive session.
I appreciate that. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. And the meeting is adjourned until 7:30.